All right, so we're going to go through the Sequential, Dave Smith, Prophet Rev2. I asked a lot of questions on the forum, not a lot, but I put a post up on the forum asking if people would be interested in kind of an in-depth overview of how to use the synth, like from the core, and like go through the actual, we're going to go through all the globals and tell you what those mean. We're going to talk about, let me get my list here for you. I'm going to leave this relatively just core understanding. I'm not going to go into the topology, like the chips, the encoders, I'm not going to go into any of that stuff. It's going to be literally like what these settings mean and how they directly correspond to just using the synthesizer. And we're going to go through an actual, I have a schematic kind of signal flow chart for you as well. But we're going to go through that. We're going to go through syncing up MIDI. We're going to go through CC programming and program changes, multi-layer recording and MIDI applications. And I'm going to show you how to set that up. And then we're going to do external controllers. And I'm going to show you kind of like a physical, almost like a physical emulation to maybe give you a visual understanding that what's going on underneath the hood in the circuit boards. So this is going to be very long. This is going to be very wordy. There is not going to be really much music at all other than in the background. I'll have some shit going on or something. I don't know. But yeah. All right, so we're down here in the global settings at page 23. The thing says 14. I think that's where the global settings start, but the actual list for the global settings is page 23 in this manual here. So if you press the global button, these parameters come up. Or these settings come up, and you can scroll through them and change the parameters of these settings with the value knobs and the parameter knobs. So I'm sure you know how to do that. I don't think I need to visually show you that. So master and course tune, like, maybe you play in standard tuning at home, but you go and play with a group that plays, a step or two down, and you're not really 100% sure on how to do those key changes or inversions or whatever it might be. So you can just kind of drop the master tune down so you can match. Maybe what you're playing with isn't something that can get up to perfect even temperament, so you can have a master fine tune. There's some fine tuning you can do with that. I don't really mess with it too much. It's just more for like other situations. I can just leave it standard and it works for me. There's also micro tunings in here too, so there's other ways to mess around with that. MIDI channels 1 through 16. So you just choose which MIDI channel depending on how many synths or piece of hardware you might be using with it. You can also, we'll get into it, but using layer B, you can do two different things simultaneously on the Rev2 and have them output separately, but we'll get into that. The MIDI clock mode, this is one thing I see people having a lot of trouble with. Maybe, again, pairing two pieces of hardware is a new experience for them, and they're just running into things they're just not familiar with, so I want to explain stuff that might help them with this. I hope it helps you out. I'm going to show you how to sync to Ableton or like a DAW, but I use Ableton, so I'm going to show you basically the vocabulary and the terminology you need to understand within your program, possibly. That'll help you get it synced up, but certain programs require different things to sync, so Ableton's the most straightforward and simple in my opinion, so that's why I'm going to use it in there, but it'll allow me to just be quick and explain that for you. MIDI clock cable, so you can use a MIDI cable, you can use the USB port. It just depends on what you're using and how you're doing it. It's not really a what works better. MIDI parameter send, so this is if you want to record, let's say you're jamming. What this is here, I'll highlight it. Actually, I'm going to go through and I'll highlight what I'm talking about now from now when I start to actually go off, because this is kind of an explanation here. There's another page 82, but you go to page 82 after, pause it and listen to this, pause it, go to page 82 if you want more details from the manual. But what this is if you are jamming, let's say you're recording your jam in your DAW, you're recording the MIDI and the audio because you want to, create something from on fly. So this is like maybe you want to change some filters and you want the pitch bends and you want the mod wheel and stuff that you change a bunch of settings as it's going and you want that recorded. This tells the Rev2 whether or not to send that out. So if you want to record all of those movements and stuff like that, you would turn this on and you would tell it whether you want CC or NRPN. If you don't know what NRPN is, you're probably not using it. I don't use it, so I'm not the most educated to talk about it. From what I understand, it's a higher resolution form of CC in a way, and it's a different control in numbers. I think it actually is more open than MIDI from what I remember. Again, I'm not an NRPN user, so I'm not really one to talk about it. I'll stop there before I put my foot in my mouth. But the CC is that's pretty much what you're going to be using if you're using MIDI. And I have this on when I'm doing longer form things that I want to record in that sense. Usually I have it off when I'm making music, but if I'm trying to record a full performance, I have this on. So now we'll move to the next setting. I'm going to sip my coffee. Scroll down here. So NRPN are actually the preferred method of parameter transmission since they cover a complete range of parameters, while CCs are limited to a range of 128. So this is why NRPNs are actually more advantageous, but I think they're actually harder to use. You need to understand them. They're a little harder. There's more you need to grasp and get what's going on with them, in my opinion, than MIDI. MIDI's a little more straightforward, and this is kind of, I want to get you started. If MIDI's not enough, move on to NRPN. Start with MIDI, and then we'll move on. You can go to the big person stuff. Now we're at 7, MIDI parameter receive. I have this on pretty much all the time, unless I have some external sequencer or I'm plugged into some friend's computer or something like that where I don't know what the hell they have in the background going. But I have this on usually. Long-winded. This is just whether or not the Rev2 will receive CC or NRPN via MIDI to change what's inside. So you can go on the computer and change what the Rev2 is doing, like change the filter cutoff, the oscillator pitch, without the sound tower or any of the editing stuff. I don't have the editor or anything, and I had to pay a bunch of bills right now, so I'm not going to buy it today, but I can show you how to not even need the editor. It's not as clean, it's not as simple, but I honestly, I just would rather just make the sound on the synthesizer than use the editor. So now we're going to do MIDI control enable on 8. So this is just whether or not the Rev2 will receive MIDI. So you can get clock, so you can clock the Rev2, but you don't want maybe, messages being sent from the computer or whatever MIDI sequencer you're using to the Rev2. If you want MIDI on and you want to be able to use MIDI with the Rev2, this needs to be on. But if you have a MIDI clip with a bunch of changes, like program changes and all sorts of automation in it that you don't want the Rev2 performing, you can turn this off and it won't, the MIDI, all the background MIDI stuff that you're not seeing on the piano roll won't affect it. MIDI program enable. This is if you want to change presets. So in a MIDI clip, you can tell it like, oh, well, I want preset, A5 to play for this part, and then when this next MIDI clip plays, I want it to be B, 47, and it'll switch, and that just tells the Rev2 whether or not it will accept those messages. So that's on or off. I have this on because I set program changes in clips when I'm writing and stuff, so I can kind of have stuff moving with me, and I can kind of do stuff in the moment. MIDI program send, this is just if you're recording a performance and you change presets, the Rev2 will tell the computer, hey, I changed a preset, so when you play this back, tell me to change these presets. So it's just a communication back and forth. It's much like the MIDI parameter send up here, number 6, it's just much like that. So MIDI sys cable, so this is just what cable you're using to transmit MIDI or sys messages to the Rev2. Is it a MIDI port or is it a USB cable? It just tells it, which port will accept sys. I have it set to USB because I don't really use sys through my DAW. I just use regular MIDI. So when I do updates, though, I run it USB, and that's where the sysx goes through it. Just for some reason, I don't know why, in my head, it just makes more sense to do that. There's no logic behind that. It's just my own weirdness. I can't I'm not going to sit here and advocate that, but it's just how I do it. Because I don't use the USB cable output. I just use a MIDI port for pretty much everything else. But it makes sense to plug in a USB port to update it. So I don't know. MIDI out select, this just tells you whether the MIDI port or the USB port or both is the actual source for the MIDI to send to go out of the Rev2. MIDI ARP seek. What comes out of the ARP and the sequencer will be transmitted out of the MIDI port. Otherwise, if you don't want that to happen and you just want the sequencer to run, and you can play, you want it, maybe you want to record the lead you play over the sequence, it'll play the lead back. It won't record what's happening during the sequencer's playback. It'll just play your performance from what the key bed is actually receiving. Art beat sync. This is just a quantize, like if the ARP's going on like half or something like that, if you hit a key before the interval is over or something like that, this is like, so it won't re-trigger until the actual next clock step. And that's exactly this. Like when you quantize, arpeggiate or note playback occurs only on the beat, regardless of when you press a key on the keyboard. So it's like everything I'm saying is literally like right in front of like what I'm highlighting. So I'm just kind of putting a voice to it because maybe that'll help kind of bring context to it. Like maybe reading it doesn't make sense, and maybe what you're reading needs more context. So hopefully that's what I'm doing here. Now here's a big one, multi-mode. This is one a lot of people are having questions with, and initially I had to kind of I had to read the manual and kind of sit with it and try some things too before I really was like, oh, okay, like this makes sense now. And I've been using it for a long time, so this wasn't the simplest thing for me to be like, to grasp right away. Coffee sip. This is whether or not your 4 outputs will actually like come out of the outputs, because otherwise everything will just come out of output A and B, but there's 4 outputs on the back of it. So this multi-mode will split those two, so layer B comes out of 3 and 4, so C and D, and layer A will come out of A and B, or 1, 2. And this is how you address each channel separately on MIDI. So let's say you're just using channel 1 for the Rev2, channel 2 would address B. And I'll show you how to merge those 2 inputs to 1 and send that to the Rev2. Again, this is going to be a very long video, so this is hopefully going to cover a lot for you. And if you want to understand more, with the here you go. Like this is exactly what I just kind of paraphrased. So this, again, everything you need to know is very straightforward in the manual. They don't try to throw too much tech bullshit at you. I think they want it to be an approachable thing for just about every single user. Again, we're going to get deeper into that, but we're going to start with, let's come back down here at local control. This is just whether or not the keyboard and stuff is doing something. So maybe in a live situation, you have an erratic vocalist, perhaps, and you have stuff on the computer that the Rev2 is doing, but you're maybe playing your bass or shaking a tambourine, perhaps. And the Rev2 is just kind of doing what you've told it to do from the computer's, instructions, and the drummer's kind of in control of that aspect. But, you don't play it for this part. For the next 10 minutes, you're not touching it. But maybe your vocalist is a little lively. And while you're shaking that tambourine, they decide to go over there and play some keys. They want to fuck with the prophet, maybe. And that's just a big no-no, because you know that they're going to turn some shit, fuck you up your settings, whatever you were doing. You're like, no, I need to do a filter sweep at the next 8 bars. You can turn local control off, so they won't be able to go back in, and even like the Rev2 will not react to any knob turns. It will not react to any key presses. It will only respond to MIDI at that point. So this will keep your wily vocalist off your shit. but I leave it on all the time because I don't have a, my Wiley vocalist has his own synthesizers. So, and he actually has a Rev2. So, he doesn't need to fuck with mine. And I play guitar in the band, so I don't even have a synth there. So in the studio, I leave it on. But if you got a Wiley vocalist, this is where you need to, this is going to be a good friend of yours. Velocity curve. This is just the curve that the velocity responds to. It's just, I think it's, I don't know if it goes from like a logarithmic, linear, exponential type thing. I'm not going to get too into that. But I'm not sure what the curve exactly is, but there's 8 curves, and just, hit the key bed and just see where you set the filter cutoff to the velocity, like full bore, and just see how soft and hard, you're hitting, changes the behavior. That's really all it is. That's just the velocity curve. Pressure curve is the curve for aftertouch, like how hard you have to push and how it reacts to the pushing, for the aftertouch to take effect. Mono stereo. This is maybe you want to plug the Rev2 into an amp, and the amp only has one input. You switch that bad boy to mono, and there you go. You got mono, so you can run into that amp, and you're not going to miss half your delays. You're not going to miss, you're not going to get weird kind of like phase things, where you're like, what happened to the sound? It was fat a minute ago. Like if you're doing maybe like a big unison detune, like a stab sound, like a big heavy trance industrial thing or something. You'd want that to be mono, so it'll sum properly out the output, and it'll sound good and punchy in an amp or something. Or in maybe you only have a mono space for a mono recording. This is going to be a very useful thing. I switch back and forth between these for sound design and just when I'm recording parts for songs and stuff like that. Maybe I don't need a big stereo wash. I just need something like right dead center, or just maybe I need a sound and I'm going to pan it because it's part of an ensemble of other sounds that are maybe somewhat similar. You don't always want stereo recordings. Again, that's a topic for a different day, but again, this is another very, very common thing I change between a lot. Pop mode. This is just like relative pass through or jump. So how the knob reacts to your turning. So maybe you have a preset and you've made some sounds and you got some knobs that are really high up, and you go to another preset and you want to turn a particular knob down. So rather than like the knob jumping to the value that you've changed it from and having like a big hard cutoff, the relative will just kind of meet you. It'll kind of meet you halfway and adjust like slightly. In live settings and stuff like that might be a little more favorable. Pass through is where you actually have to find the value of it, and it'll latch and grab, and then you can change the value. You have to, but the knob is like pretty much useless until you find the value of like what the original setting is. And you can look at that when you just hit miscellaneous parameter and turn the knob. It'll show you where the setting is. So if you hold MISC parameter, turn the knob, it'll tell you like what that setting is, and it won't change it. So you can like, oh, okay, so that's where the filter sits on sounds like this. Like it's a very useful thing. So again, it explains it a little better. So there's also, again, there's a lot of good literature on it in the manual. So I'm just again paraphrasing this to go through because there's a few. Alternate tuning is just, this is equal temperament is just your standard Western 12 tones, and then there's 17 different tunings, and there's more information on it, but there are a lot of them are microtonal and non-Western, non-chromatic, so they're pretty cool. I mess with them here and there. I'm not too savvy with it. Sequencer pedal mode. So this is just the behavior of the different modes you can use to get the sequencer to react. I'm not going to go too in depth, like just read the manual on this one. There's a lot of kind of, if you don't understand triggers and gates, you might not be using triggers and gates for anything else. So it might not really, you might not care. It might not apply to you. But this is some useful information if you have outboard, maybe analog sequencers, maybe like you got a little dope for dark time or something like that. Or maybe an Arturia key step that has some cool polyphonic and cool pattern sequencing stuff that the Rev2 may not have. The Rev2's sequencers, it's kind of up to you to make it complex on there, and it doesn't really give you a crazy amount. They're pretty straightforward step sequencers, which is great, but if you have an external clock source that can make more interesting patterns, the Rev2 will do some pretty wild shit. But check those out if you have external sequencers, and just try the different modes, see what works for you. But the manual explains it just fine. I'll kind of ramble about all this. Foot assignment is if you have maybe like an expression pedal, and you can plug that in, and this is just kind of the basic hard, quote unquote, hard wiring, like default wiring. You can change it in the mod matrix, but these are kind of like just basic things where I always want it to just do this. I wish I had a foot switch to just do this. And then you could, so that way you don't have to program it every time you make a patch maybe. Pedal polarity. This is just normal or reversed. Like maybe you want it on the filter cutoff. So if you bring the pedal all the way forward, like down with your foot, maybe you want that to cut the filter off. Like you want it to bring the cutoff down. Maybe you want more of a tactile kind of response with a setting, and it just makes more sense to bring your foot up or down for that particular thing. That just sets the pedal polarity. Sustain ARP. So this is just ARP hold. It just sets the function of the sustain pedal in the rear of the synth. So it's like if you want like a pedal, like maybe you want the ARP to just kind of like da 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 with your hand on the key, but when you let go it stops. But you want it to hold. Maybe you have to do something different and actually like mess with the knobs or man something else, but you don't want to have to really hit a button with your hands. You can just have your foot held down on the ARP and it'll keep the ARP going. If you keep a little foot switch on there, that's all that is. Save and edit B on off. This just disables the saving of layer B when you save a program. So you have to hold both layer A and B. I have it on just to save B generally because I'm not always using B. You have the memory for it, so it doesn't really matter. This calibrates the wheels, calibrating wheels. It's analog stuff, but there's a bunch of digital microcontrollers inside the thing to calibrate all this stuff and kind of fix that. I haven't really had to. You have to calibrate stuff like when you do firmware updates, but I've only had to like calibrate the oscillators. I think like one time when they were kind of tracking funny, and that was it. Basic program. This just loads your basic template saw wave program. Calibrate. This calibrates the oscillators and the filters. Like exactly, you shouldn't need to do this under normal circumstances since the filters are calibrated at the factory and generally don't require recalibration or retuning until you actually update the firmware. You have to go through and do all that. Reset globals. This just resets all the settings you've changed. Data dump. This dumps the program. Just the singles preset into your port, whatever you're saving your librarian in, whatever librarian you're using. This just saves it into that. The dump bank, this dumps the whole like 127 programs. Dump all banks, this dumps all the banks. Dump scale. Sorry. This is just like whatever scale you have, because I think you can use custom scales in here too, but this just dumps that scale to your sysx librarian. Dump all scales. Pretty self-explanatory as well. So those are all the basic global parameters. I hope it's enough context for you to understand maybe what to go to when you are trying to change some settings or maybe get it to act a certain way. But from there, we are now just going into now some of the more the more physical aspects of this now. Alright, so it's a basic overview of the globals. We're going to revisit the manual a bit more throughout this, and hopefully I didn't ramble too much. Hopefully I was able to edit out any, whatever unnecessary ums and shit like that. But I have used a very high-end rendering program to create a scaled down kind of mock-up of the signal flow on here. I won't get into details of how I created this. It's pretty advanced, so we're just going to go to that. All right. Yeah. Okay, so this is your signal tie or route. So this is pretty much just says that like this item is tied or routed to this item, and it's like a hard wiring. So it's pretty straightforward. Like I said, we're just going to focus on this audio path here. So you have your oscillator 1 and 2. These both go into the mixer. You have your noise generator, your sub, which is a subdivision of oscillator 1. It's a square wave, just square subwave. And it's just a like a 1/2 division. And then this is your quote-unquote like mixer area where your knobs are, and that left and right oscillator 1, 2 knob. These go directly into the filter from that. The filter goes directly out to the amplifier, and the amplifier just goes to your outputs where you plug the cables into. It's a very simple audio path. There's nothing extraordinary or groundbreaking in the sense of innovation in this. It's just a tried and true signal path. This is basically the core of a subtractive patch on anything. So it's just enough to be extremely dangerous, and until you're getting into like the big digital things, or like, oh, this plays 8 things at the same time. Like your routing matrices are pretty simple on analog synthesizers as far as your signal path is gonna go for more traditional functionality. So from that, you'll see your filter is controlled by your filter envelope. And then you will see that your amp is controlled by your amp envelope. These are hardwired. These are those sections that say filter envelope, amp envelope. Like that's what these are. And then you have your envelope 3 up here. So from here, I'm going to explain the green. This is your open mod point. So envelope, it doesn't mean there's just one. It just means that there are open mod points, because you can go into the routing matrix and tell what to go to the envelope. Maybe you want LFO1 to control the decay of envelope 3 in a cycling mode. You can do that. Maybe you want a few things to go to envelope 3 to control how it behaves. You can do that. That's what open mod point is. Amp envelope, same thing. You can have multiple things going to the amp envelope to control its behavior. Filter, same thing. Filter envelope, filter cutoff, and all of that, same thing. Key track, I don't think you can mod the key tracking itself, but you can mod just different like velocities and things like that. The amp level you can mod with different things, not just the envelope but the actual overall level. Same with the filter. The mixing, you can modulate the mixing, so how much the sub is coming in, maybe how much the noise is coming in, the level of the oscillators. The oscillators themselves have open mod points that are in the mod matrix. That's why the mod matrix is green, because its entire existence is an open mod structure. The LFOs, all four of them have that. They all have open mod points. You can mod the frequency and the level of them by each other even. And then the step sequencer down here, you can modulate parameters of the step sequencer, and the step sequencer is pretty much a stepped modulation that's either controlled by a clock or your key presses, and it is an open mod source. It will mod things. Notice the poly sequencer is not. It only has the 2 outputs. So, and then that gets us down to key response down here and optional divorce or tie. So these items, like envelope 3 up here, and you'll see oscillators down here, because you can turn the oscillators off, so the oscillators won't actually respond to the keys. You can play the filter. That's a lesson for a different video. And also the LFOs, you can reset with key presses. You can or clock sync them, or both, or choose them not. I usually keep them free running depending on what I'm doing, but that's an optional tie or divorce. And same with the mod matrix. You can tell the mod matrix to respond. You can use the key bed as a modulation source in the mod matrix. It's pretty simple, but it's optional. You don't have to. You can though. And same with the gates on the step sequencer. You can either tell it to move forward on key presses, or you can tell it to just play on its own. And there's ways to actually use, let's say you want to run notes. Let's say you have a melody sequence or some sort of step sequence on channel 1. So you can use channel 2 to actually slew that, so it kind of it has like slides and glides and stuff like that when it's running through those steps. And you can do that twice, so you can play like 2 melodies at once and have it going on. So that's pretty cool. So that's kind of like the key response here. This is down here. This is just the sequence selector button. This is just a representation of, you have to hit that button to change which sequencer you're using. I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it. You have, your 2 oscillators and your noise and your sub going to a filter that's controlled with an envelope, and that's going to an amp that's controlled with another envelope, and those go out. And then you have other options to control what happens inside of this audio path here, depending on what your keys are doing or what the sequencers and the clock is doing. That's pretty much what you do. You control what the synth does with the modulation. You don't necessarily have to play the thing, but if you are playing the thing, you can have your playing affect the things that control the synth. So it can get pretty like entangled. It's cool. Like it's a very powerful, straightforward thing. And that's what I do love about it. So if you want this, I just highly suggest full screening and doing just a screenshot, a snip, and just save it as a PNG or a JPEG or something like this. I'm sure there are much more advanced layouts and schematics of the synthesizer available that maybe a real engineer has done, but this is just the basic, like, I just want to show you, like, this is what the synth is, pretty much. So hopefully that makes some sense for you. There really isn't that much more yammering to do about the very just blatant facts about this synth and the global settings. So hopefully that kind of sums up this part. We are actually now going to go into a more advanced part of this. We're going to look at how to plug this into your computer. As far as, more advanced than just reading the manual and figuring out what the thing in front of you actually is and what it's doing to the electrons that are being pushed through it. So we're here in Ableton. I'm going to do my best to not hit the stop button or the pause button. I'm going to use the stop buttons here because that's what I had to do the last time, is I stopped in the middle and I recorded 16 minutes of nothing. But yeah, so I'm going to show you how to pretty much just get started in Ableton, and then show you, hopefully this is pretty much where you need to go in your program to set this up. You need to go to your preferences, you need to go to your MIDI settings and see what's happening in there. From there, I can't tell you any more beyond what Ableton's going to show you. So first we're going to go to options, open your preferences. Now we were just in MIDI because I was doing a take a minute ago, but it starts usually at look and feel if you haven't really delved into this. All right, so we're here in Ableton. I'm going to show you how to get your MIDI set up and synced in Ableton here. And this will kind of translate to other programs in a sense, at least give you an idea of where you need to go in your program to access these. So in Ableton, you go into your preferences, usually in settings and stuff like that, in other programs as well. And then this is what opens up. Now, if you have really high latency, this is not my normal kind of latency working. I just had this set up for the last thing I was working on. I wasn't doing performances, so don't really pay attention to this right now. Set this up for you. Don't worry about this right now. I would go into hardware setup, but it might stop my recording to change the buffer and stuff like that. I might get weird glitches and corruptions, so I'm not going to risk any of that. It may not, but it might. I don't want to, deal with it doing something bad. But my buffer's set to 512. I'm recording video, I'm doing MIDI transmission, and I'm recording audio simultaneously in multiple programs. So my buffer's kind of in the middle. There's other buffers that go very high and very low. If I'm recording a MIDI performance, my buffer will be like 96 or 128, depending on what computer or what interface I'm using. It'll be really low just so I can get very low latency. Higher buffers, are less CPU usage but more RAM, then they're better for higher track counts and things like that. Lower buffer numbers are better for less latency and performance-oriented performance in a sense. Like, it's kind of redundant to say that, but you get it. So that's kind of a general just how to adjust for latency. And then you go down here to where it says latency. You can adjust for things like that. Generally, when I'm running a lower latency or a lower buffer number when I'm actually recording stuff into the computer, it's lower, but I've been mixing a lot, so I haven't had to worry about really any of the latency. So then you would go into MIDI, link MIDI. Link, we're not talking about Ableton Link right now. We're talking about just general MIDI, just standard MIDI function. Let me sip my... So here it's going to show you your control surfaces. MIDI. I have a push. It's not plugged in right now. I have a Mio iConnectivity Mio 2. That's the DIN 1 in, out, DIN 2 in, out. And then I have an Akai MPD 26. And Ableton remembers generally what you've plugged into it. So depending on what you have, let's say you have like a Steinberg UR22 or a Focusrite, a little Scarlett whatever Duo or whatever the hell they're called. Those have MIDI inputs, and some of those have MIDI inputs, and it'll say like on the Steinberg, it'll say Steinberg MIDI, in, Steinberg MIDI out. So it'll address that port. From down here, your ports, this will allow you how those ports behave. So in here, track corresponds to over here where it says, bring it way over, MIDI from. So DIN 1 and DIN 2, motorcycles going by, sorry. DIN 1 and DIN 2 wouldn't pop up here if I did not have them listed right here on track. That's going to tell you whether or not your MIDI will pop up in your input routing and output routing, or your channels will for your MIDI. And it goes the same with your input-output configurations. If they're not showing up in your input-output bar down in here, you need to go to input-output configuration for your audio device and your MIDI here, because these are your ports. This is whether or not you're going to see them in here, and then this is what they actually are. Sync, you want them synced generally. Just for common practice, you'll want them synced. I'm assuming you want the Rev2 to clock the same as your DAW session, your delays and all of that to be time synced and whatnot. I just leave it synced for the sake of it. If I need to turn it off, I just go in here, hit preferences, and turn it off. It's not hard. Now remote, this is like when I have push and the MPD 26 plugged in, remote is turned on. That is turned on because I want those to be a remote control for Ableton. I don't usually use the Rev2 as a MIDI controller, but you can. Like, let's say if you're doing something and recording or playing and you turn your filter cutoff on the Rev2, you want other things to happen in Ableton, you can macro and MIDI map that knob to, the filter cutoff on the Rev2 into Ableton to control things in Ableton. I don't generally do that. I'll just use a MIDI controller because it's just easier for that sake. But if you're, don't have access to that, or you just would rather have one streamlined kind of functionality, use or experience, whatever it might be, you can do that. So that's what remote would be. From here, I'm already set up, so I don't really need to go in and do anything. But if these weren't selected, I would go for my MIDI input, let's say DIN 1 and DIN 2, right? It would be track on, sync on, track on, sync on for 1 and 2. And then if I had my MIDI controller that wasn't USB, perhaps, maybe it's, a hard, you need a MIDI cable, I would use remote for these inputs if I had to use one of those inputs for the MIDI controller itself. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, there's way more videos on this probably, but this is just the basic overview for getting your Rev2 plugged in. Now, if you're using USB on the Rev2, this is all for a MIDI cable. If you're using USB, it'll pop up. It'll pop up in input output. It'll say Rev2. It'll just say Rev2. That's that simple. It'll install the drivers and then Rev2 will pop up. You just make sure to sync track. And from that point, if you want remote, you can put remote on. And that's how to set it up. You go in, you tell it what your interface is or where your MIDI ports are coming, where they are on what interface. So mine are the Mio, the DIN 1 and the DIN 2. You want to show them on the track on your input bar here input output, but your routing bar. It's called the routing bar. You want it synced generally, and your remote is going to be up to you. All right, so now get rid of this one. I'm gonna go into a little better view of this. I have my Rev2 is in split mode, A/B. So A and B are corresponded to two separate. I have 4 cables coming out of the Rev2 to run into my audio interface, and that's where all my signals into these 2 channels. So right now, this one channel will only address layer A. We're not going to get into A/B right now. We're just going to focus on just plugging in one channel, not using multi-mode. So you just go into Ableton, or you go back into your clip view, your session view, whatever view you're using. You can do it from here as well. I think it's a little easier to just kind of look at it from this window. So you go in down to your MIDI in from. If you don't know how to access this, you go down here. I'll hit my mouse so you can see, or you can't really see the mouse locator, but here's the mouse over here in the left, lower mid left, or lower mid right, dyslexia, sorry. If you don't see that MIDI bar, you can just hit this IO. Same with your sends and returns. If you're wondering why my Ableton might look a little different, boom, you can, totally get rid of all of that. And there's your crossfader, there's your track delay. That's not an effect delay, that's a time delay. It's a syncing thing. Not syncing, yeah, anyways, not important right now. So we have, in here we have our input, our routing bar. So I have my Rev2 on DIN 1. My Rev2 is selected to channel 2. It just depends on where your Rev2's MIDI is accessed. So in the preferences, that's where you're going to set all that up. And if you've selected track for those inputs, they'll show up in the tracks here. So I'm on DIN 1, channel 2. I don't have a MIDI cable. I don't have an input from the Rev2 to the computer. The Rev2 will not send MIDI to the computer right now, just the way I have it. I have kind of a complex thing going with my MIDI. It's kind of a pain in the ass to get it all routed and change inputs right now, just the way things are kind of set up. And I don't have a spare MIDI cable actually, and I don't feel like unplugging multiple things to get to that MIDI cable. So for the sake of this, we're not going to use inputs on the Rev2. We're just going to use the MIDI, just the piano roll here. And see, I have a single note just kind of laid out. So my output is for DIN 1 as well to the channel 2. From there, you go in, like I already have a MIDI clip made, and you just double click on the thing and it, a clip will pop up. If you don't have a MIDI track, you right click, insert MIDI track, or Control Shift T for Windows. I already have a clip, and this is just a low C, a low C. I think this is just 16 counts. That's all it is. And this is just addressing layer A. Out here. All right, so from there, that's pretty much it. That's how you send stuff to the Rev2. I'll go through this. Let me go into user library. Let's go to grooves. This is how I have my stuff organized. So, okay, so here's a pretty complex MIDI sequence. Delete this. I want to make sure. Oh yeah, here we go. I made not a better one, but I made one that's a little more controlled in a sense. This is the MIDI clip. I didn't make this. I literally went to Google, typed in jazz MIDI. I'm not a jazz aficionado. I'm not somebody to speak to jazz about. A real jazz person would probably laugh at me. I don't really care. My cat's playing in the window, sorry. But I'm not a jazz person, but this is just, I liked the melody, and I just kind of programmed a patch in the Rev2 to play this back. So this is just kind of an example of, here you go, like here's a tone, like this is what you can do. So hold on, let me go to the actual preset on here. Okay, here we go. And this might even be kind of fast, so I think I played this down at like 80 beats a minute. I'm recording at 120, but you know, you'll get the idea. It doesn't matter. Okay, everything's coming through. I wanted to make sure that was routing properly. So here, I'll just record a little clip so you can hear it too. And I'll play it. So while this is going, check this out. Like, let's show you the capabilities here. Bring it down a fifth, or not a fifth, but 5 steps. So what this might benefit from, check this. So you can just go multiply by 2. And everything's in half now. Yeah, so you get that. So that's basically how, you know, there you go. You have a MIDI performance, correct? You know, you send it out, and from there you set audio tracks. I have my input set up here. It doesn't, you know what's kind of funny? It doesn't look like a lot of these windows pop up in OBS. OBS is such a fucking weird. So watch, I'll set this output. It has to be display capture. It's just so fucking weird. Anyways, so I have my 17, 18, and 19, and 20 are my Rev2 on my interface. So from there, that's how I'm tracking my inputs. And yours will be whatever yours are plugged into. And mine's multi-mode, so I have them separated. So when I'm playing something from just channel 2 here, you'll notice that only A is firing off. Well, hello, my cat has come to, join me. You might hear some bumping. She tends to. From here, what we're going to have to do, I'm going to move you, kitty. Sorry. I got to put you down. Okay. So from here, I'm going to show you how to address multi-mode. So we're going to go over to the Rev2. I'm going to quite literally make 2 extremely simple patches, and I'm going to show you how to address layer A and B. So I'm going to go over there first. You'll see me on the little corner camera. I'm going to go to a default program, initialized otherwise. 29, load basic patch, and then you hit right. All right, so here I got some audio recording so you'll hear. All right. We want to stack layers A and B. The cat has taken over at this point, so I'm trying to get her out of the way here. You can have the chair now. There you go. I'll sit in the other one. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. So we're going to stack layer A and B. So now we're getting the same thing out of both of them. My layer A is channel 2. My layer B will now be channel 3 by default. I don't know if there's a way to change that in the editor. I don't have the editor. But now if you're layer 1, layer B, if you're channel 1 on layer A, your layer B will be channel 2. I use channel 2 because I have a different synth that's channel 1. So channel 2 and 3 are now my A and B. It rhymes. Maybe that's why I remember it. But so now I'm just going to edit channel A to be a kind of a just a simple little bass tone, and then channel B is going to be a very just a little melody. I'm not trying to show you how to make sounds. I'm just showing you how to separate these two things. So layer B is fine. Or layer A, sorry. Layer A is fine right now. So together, you know, you're like, okay, whatever, like, fine. So here's the thing. What we need to do, this is where it gets a little, I don't think it's convoluted, it's pretty simple, but you just need to know how to route things. And we're going to show you how that works. So let's say we got our channel, this is going to be our A, so let's make our bass line. Notice it's only triggering channel A. This is what makes it easy on the computer here. Let's just do that. Again, I'm not trying to change your life with sequencing. I'm trying to just make a pattern to show you how to use your synth. Okay, cool. Maybe you want it to be a little thumpier. Bring the envelope in. Cool, that's just fine, right? So let's stop that. What we want to do here now is add another MIDI track. And let's make it this teal kind of, no, it's too confusing, I think. Let's make it a lighter green like that. So now what we want to do is, we don't have any inputs. We're not using these right now. So we don't need it. But we do want an output. This can be channel 3. This is now our little melody. So this is just like A to G sharp, right? So we'll just... So we just have some notes. Let's fold it so we can see all the notes. I'm literally just, I'm not even trying to play in any key. I'm just, these notes are kind of consonant. So it's just, again, so you have our bass sequence here. And then we now have a melody sequence here. So what we can do, everything's good. I'm just making sure I'm not going to stop my program. I want to make sure everything's dandy here. Oh yeah, what I wanted to do with the melody, I want this more, I want this longer. So we're going to make this like 4 times as long. This is now going to be 16 counts, and this is going to be a 4 count bass line. There we go. So we have our 2 sequences. And And that's kind of how they're going to work. So yeah, I mean, there's really not much else to like break down. It's just a matter of really like what you want the sequences to do, as far as this MIDI performance. Now, we're going to get into another thing that's a little more complex. Okay, we got 2 more tracks going. That's what we need. Okay, so let's say the bass line, we want the bass line to be a little less boring. So here, we're going to go back down. I don't want to mess with these. We're just going to kind of do its thing. Let's say the bass line, we want the bass line to be a little less boring. So here, we're going to go back down. I don't want to mess with these. We're just going to kind of do its thing. That's fine. I'm just something listenable, at least. So, while I sip this, let's go into the bass line. So now we're going to go into MIDI control here. So you want to hit this little button over here. And this is going to open up all your MIDI control. So now we're going to learn how to map MIDI control to this. The thing you have to remember though is you need to be aware of where your knobs are set, because where the knob is set is your maximum and minimum in a sense. So if your decay is all the way down on the synth, you won't be able to actually, the decay on an envelope, you won't be able to actually edit the decay. The decay should be all the way up, so that way you can pull the delay down in the program. On the knob should be all the way up. So with this, I'm gonna let the sequence go. I've just muted it in the recording. We're gonna go back to the manual real quick. So now we need to go to our MIDI implementation, which is in the back. Here we go. So these are our CC numbers. So these correspond in Ableton now. So we're gonna find our filter. We're gonna find our envelope amount. So filter envelope amount is 106. We're gonna go back into Ableton. We're gonna go to MIDI control. We're gonna go to 106. So right now, I think my envelope's relatively low on the Rev2 right now, the amount. So here, we're gonna go. Oh, you know what? I might have MIDI control also set off, turned off. Let me double check this. There we go. So what I changed was MIDI param receive was turned off. So that's where you were going to go in the global, like we talked about earlier, MIDI param receive to get these changes. So now, maybe you want to slew it out. Like, so check this out. We're going to edit these a little bit. Notice that? How different it is now? Filter amount, this might not be necessarily the best on the filter amount. Maybe the filter amount's good, so let's cut this. See, and that's the thing though, is it'll default back to the all the way up, so you need to kind of bring it back. So we just brought it back down. It's at 39 right now. So we're gonna actually go to cutoff, like the actual filter cutoff, which I think you can go, is it up here? No, I think it's like 40 something. Let me double check. Let's look at the manual. Again, this is why we have the manual. Oh, here we go. Filter frequency, 102. So not 106, we want to go to 102. I mean, you can use whatever, but I prefer right now maybe the sound of the modulating parameter 102, which is the filter's cutoff. little more interesting, right? Now to edit the notes, we go back to this little down here at the bottom left. Click that off, and now we can... But yeah, so I mean you can go in and you can start modulating all sorts of other parameters. So from here, I'm going to stop these sequences now. So from here, you can go in and what you do is you go in and you set the oscillator pitch and stuff. You can figure that out where you like to set all of that, but set your envelope amount to like just like 1 or -1 so you can use bipolar, because there's a bipolar control on here for your envelope amount depending on where it is. So it's like you might want to leave that in the center and then just kind of modulate, but it doesn't really respond to a bipolar a visual in Ableton. It's just like this is your filter amount, because you can hit the envelope amount on the Rev2 and it's bipolar. It goes negative or positive. This just shows you a 0 to 100%. So if you want it to be like right in the middle, like pretty much nothing, you would just keep it, you would just leave it at the center point and not edit this. But if you wanted to bring it up, you would just bring this up. If you wanted to take it negative, you would have to set it all the way negative, and 0 from here. If you're at 64 or 65, this is now 0 if you set the filter envelope all the way negative. So this way you have full range of negative and positive modulation. So this is how you would do it. You would just set that filter envelope amount all the way down, or all the way up if you want like an inverted if you want it to act inverted. But that's how you would do that for your bipolar controls. You would set those all the way to the negative, so that way you could bring up your MIDI modulation to 64 or 65 depending on where you want your 0 to be. I usually pick between those two numbers because that's kind of in the middle depending on how it's being addressed. But I mean, yeah, I'm trying to go over in my head as I'm doing this, like thinking about what else I need to kind of explain to simplify it. But it is kind of this simple. You just kind of have to do the legwork to do this. This isn't the step sequencer or anything like this. This is just purely using MIDI and stuff. So it's like the step sequencer and all that's going to be a different lesson. But this is just getting going and using the thing from basic functions. So this is how you would go about doing all of that. And yeah, like, so it's not extremely hard. But yeah, so if you have the desire to go through and pretty much just make per step clip automation, you can do that. Like, so let's say this clips like this, but the next bass line has a bunch of other different modulation, but you want to use the same sound. You would just go in, you duplicate it, because then all the modulation's duplicated. See, it's showing I'm clicking between these, but the modulation on 106, so this is our filter amount, filter envelope amount. It's the same. You've duplicated it. So all you got to do is go in and change things. Even if you just want slight variance, like it's there. And you would just do that for the same layer, like on B. So it's like we have one going for this. Maybe we want to, bring the cutoff down on this like kind of leady patty thingy. You can do that. You just have to go in to your MIDI control. Right now it's on pitch bend, so like it'll, but you just go in and you tell it like, oh, okay, well, our filter cutoff was 102, right? So you're like, oh, okay, cool. And where the filter cutoff is set right now is your 0 point. So you want to, like, again, this is something you would want to turn all the way up, so you could just bring it down from all the way up to 0. I think that makes a lot of sense from that perspective, because when you use a VST, pretty much everything's just open and all the way up, so you have to turn stuff down. You're kind of working the same way, but this, I don't use the sound editor because I just use this, or I just turn the knobs on the synth. It's not really, it's a lot easier to just turn the knobs on the synth when you understand where the signal's going and how to change and modulate what the signal is doing or what you're hearing, yeah. So I'm thinking to myself, trying to mull over what else for this part, but it's really that simple. You go in, you create one MIDI track and one performance, and then you go in and create a second performance on another MIDI track, and you just allocate those performances to layer 1 and layer 2, or layer A and layer B. And from there, if you're set to multi-mode in the globals, you can have two simultaneously playing. Well, it's redundant, sorry. You can have two independent synthesizers, 8 voice or 4 voice, depending on which, if you have an 8 or a 16 voice, playing simultaneously. And they can play performances and have full MIDI implementation. So technically this is 2 full analog synthesizers in one. It really is killer. So hopefully that breaks that part down, and we can, I think, kind of move on from there. All right, so the next part here is program changes. So maybe you just have like a few presets that you've made for a set or some sort of session, and you don't want the, sorry, my computer fan might be a little loud. You don't necessarily want to manage, maybe you're just using the module, you don't actually have the keyboard version, and this translates to the module too. You can just set program changes within the group. So down here, let me bring this down actually so you can see better. So we have this, I'll fold it so you can see the notes. We don't need the velocities necessarily. So you have MIDI sequence, right? So right down here you have PGM change, program change. So bank doesn't really do anything. I think it might change to the, oh bless you kitty. It might switch between user and factory. I haven't really messed with that, but I noticed it doesn't change my groups. So like you have, like the banks are groups, so you have 4 groups. And then you have like 127 programs within those groups, or 128, yeah, I think it's 127 within those groups. So this would be like bank 2 at sub 2, and then program 67. So it corresponds right there. So, so that's the sound right now coming out of there. Just from this clip we were using earlier. But so let's play this, what's going on with this. So that's a little preset. And then down here we have another MIDI clip with some stuff. There's some stuff turned off. But then you can see it's sub 1, so bank 1, program 17. And these are all just like sounds I've made. These aren't factory sounds, so they won't sound the same on yours. So that's a way to jump between those.